Hi gang, I've opened a gaming centre. I have an actual venue in London for the specific purpose of running events, and it's been a bit of a weird journey to make that happen. So, in case you're thinking of doing something similar, let's go through how this happened, all the things we had to think about when we were doing it, and if it's actually gonna work. Hey, this is a YouTube channel, I keep forgetting, so like and subscribe. Right, so this is a bit of a story time video. How did I end up running a gaming centre, albeit a temporary one? The Prometheum tank is now open in South London. It's been a bit of a journey for the four of us involved to get it set up and functioning, including thinking about a lot of things we sort of didn't expect to think about. But it is working, it is running, and it has happened. And the journey in order to get to that space has involved us trying to think of 3 or 4 different ways we could do this before eventually settling on just getting our own space. So how did we end up with the gaming centre kind of starts with a different question. How did I end up running events so often anyway? Okay, as well as being a lore tuber for Warhammer 40k, obviously I also play these games and make armies and do modelling. Not everyone on YouTube actually does all that stuff, but although most of the stuff I do on YouTube is lore, I do try and fold that in a bit. All my social media channels are mostly models rather than promoting these videos, and one of the things we do on the channel that's much more in that vein is Tale of Four Gamers. If you don't know, it's a monthly podcast-style chat show on my second channel, Arbitarian's Precinct House, and it follows the popular series you occasionally used to see in versions of White Dwarf. 4 gamers, that's me and 3 friends, assemble an army and usually learn to play a game over a period of months, slowly building that up from scratch, and then we cap it off by attending an event. I started this right at the start of the channel, and when we started doing it, our end goal for the first series was an event that one of our friends was running. We started building 5th edition Warhammer fantasy armies, and our deadline was an event run by Ben from 90% Geek. And for that sort of YouTube series, an event like that's really useful. It gives you a hard endpoint, like a goal, something you're working towards, and a deadline, which is really nice. So when we did the next big Tale of Four Gamers series, Horus Heresy, to coincide with the 2nd edition of the game in 2022, there was no convenient event placed for when we'd finish, so I thought, well, why not just run one myself? I've done a few events before. It's not that hard unless it gets out of hand. Also, because we'd got so many comments about people building their armies along, we'd started folding that into the episodes. At the end of each episode, people could email in photos of their armies that they were building, and we'd show them and chat about how much we like the paint jobs and things like that. I actually stole the idea from the Independent Characters podcasts, who do the same thing with their Discord. So, for this event, I booked a few tables at Warhammer World. I asked all those people who'd been emailing photos in if they wanted to come, and we ended up running 2 events. A Zone Mortalis event, halfway through, and then to finish off the series, a 12-person Horus Heresy full-size event. We used all of the fancy feature tables at Warhammer World, because no one ever books those for big events. But because it's at Warhammer World, those sort of things are quite easy to run. They have tables and terrain. There's no charge for using them, which means there's no need for ticketing, and we don't even need to record scores on a leaderboard. These aren't tournaments. We came up with a bit of narrative, matched the loyalists to the traitors, and played 4 games over a weekend. Very easy. The one we did after that was Legions Imperialis when that was released, and we celebrated the end of that by running a little event at Bad Moon Cafe in London, which is a similar deal. They've got the tables, they've got the terrain. It was Legions Imperialis, so we needed to do a bit more work to get enough terrain. But it worked really well. The only annoying thing about that is obviously there is a charge, understandably, so you need to then organise prices and tickets and make sure everyone's paying. But still, that went okay. So, cut to now. The latest Tale of Four Gamers that we've been running is Warhammer 40,000, the Badab War. The idea has been to play all different scales of 40k, doing it as an escalation league, starting with Kill Team through to Combat Patrol and then boarding actions, and then up to reasonably sized games of Warhammer 40k. The Badab War is this very big conflict within the lore that Forge World had once made a series of campaign books about, And I'd always had this idea that you could play the entire campaign as a series of events. Each event is one of the phases of the war, and in that weekend you run the event, you do all the big battles that happened as like custom missions. So that became the plan. We do a long escalation style league, and at each step, once people have built their kill team or their combat patrol or their boarding action, we run a little event at a venue for that game system. And slowly, over the course of 8 or 9 months, we tell the story of the Badab War. The first 2 of these events I did pretty much the same as before. For Kill Team, we ran a 1-day event at Bad Moon Cafe in London, and for Combat Patrol, we ran a 2-day event at Warhammer World. Again, these are relatively easy, partly because with Kill Team and Combat Patrol, you can fit 2 games on one 6x4 table. So that not only makes it easier to find a venue, because you don't have to book as many tables, it also brings the cost down a bit if you're hiring somewhere like Bad Moon. But at the start of this year, 2025, this all became a bit more difficult to book. Once we got to the scale in the Badab War, where we were playing full-size games of 40k, you kind of need full-size tables. And if you're going to have 10 to 20 people coming, that means a lot more tables than we were doing before. So we'd either have to entirely book out a game cafe or book a lot of tables at Warhammer World, which is really difficult nowadays. They have loads of events on. In fact, booking that scale of event over spring and summer in London is difficult anyway. So by about January, February, I kind of wanted to book the next event, but we didn't really have a venue, and it would only get busier, and the events are only getting bigger. And at the same time, Russ, one of the 4 gamers, his channel is also linked below, wanted to run some more Horus Heresy events. And obviously over Christmas, back visiting the family, we were all sort of digging through the lofts and came up with a sort of idea. A lot of the events we've been to recently, ones we go to for fun to play Heresy or something, tend to happen in the UK in school halls. Due to a weird quirk of lack of funding, a lot of schools in the UK have started hiring out their classrooms and sports halls at the weekend as meeting rooms or event spaces. And we thought, well, look, if we all raid our old lofts for all the terrain we've ever built over the years, maybe bought a bit more, we could probably assemble like a kit of 12 tables of terrain that we could take to a hired venue and run an event with. So we figured out what we got, and then for like February, March, I was looking around the local area trying to find somewhere near us that was available, which could hire us a hall big enough with enough tables to do the events we want. I still had 3 more events to run in the Badab War series, and I wanted to kind of keep the pace going. But it took a really long time. A few places that were close to us just were really bad at getting back to us, or everywhere was fully booked to the weekends, or all the big rooms that we needed were fully booked to the weekends. And then at the end of April, I got a strange offer at work. My company, the one that I do for my regular day job, we rent a unit in a shared workspace, one of those big converted warehouse buildings that's divided up into loads of units and then rented out to different companies. And our building currently has a few units in it that need a bit of maintenance, which might take a little while. Nothing huge, but enough that they couldn't rent them out to new customers for a few months. And so the company offered around and went, look, if anyone needs any extra storage space, we'll give you a really discounted rate for 3 months until the maintenance gets done and they're ready to rent again. The timing was such that 3 months would be enough time to run my 3 Badab events, and we could run some Heresy events, and maybe other people will want to use it to run events once it's all set up. And we reckoned if we can run an event, maybe an event and a half per month, it would cover the costs. We hadn't figured out all the costs yet, but that was the idea. So we went for it, or at least I went for it. That's how we ended up getting the space. The next job was to start planning the actual events. First thing was pricing. We thought that the space would be big enough for between 10 and 12 6x4 tables. Not completely sure till we got in there, which we couldn't do till we had the keys, but 10 to 12 tables is 20 to 24 players per event. When we were looking into all the other venues earlier on, the prices we were getting for an event of that size was about £55 to £60 per player for the weekend, which is a little more than I would feel comfortable charging to especially patrons. We wanted to try and keep it at a quite reasonable £40 for a weekend event. We knew there were going to be some other costs, tables, chairs, how we actually do the boards. We thought the total outlay, including the rent, bills, and all the stuff we need, would probably hit around £2,500. With a ticket price of £40 and pretty tight margins, it was difficult to find a very good deal with all the major ticketing sites. A lot of them charge a percentage ticket fee, which works out, once you've done all the credit card processing, to about £3 to £4 on each ticket, which is quite a chunk. As again, I wouldn't want to charge people a booking fee, so it has to be taken out of the 40 quid. In the end, the best deal I found was Ticket Tailor, which has all the usual features, but it charges a flat fee per ticket, which works out to about 50p, as long as you buy a big batch up front. And then also, when we set up the events, we mentioned that it would be really good if people used PayPal, because then we wouldn't get charged credit card fees. Once we had that sorted, we set up the 3 Badab events and Russ's first Heresy event, and we started publicizing those anywhere we could. I signed up to one of those like later Monday things to do loads of social media posting. Scheduling, we found, was actually a bit of a nightmare because this was all happening so quickly. We were taking on, this was probably early May, and we were taking on the venue mid-May. We already had various commitments over summer, like I had work on and things like that. And also there were other events happening already that might make it hard to find players. Russ did a fair bit of research into making sure his Heresy events wouldn't clash with anyone else's nearby, at least all the regular ones he goes to. But we actually had a planned Blood Bowl event that we had to cancel because it turned out that there were just too many other Blood Bowl events in the southeast, either that weekend or a weekend either side of it, so no one wanted to buy any tickets. By the time we actually did get keys, ticket sales were looking okay though, not breaking even yet, but good enough that, you know, I might not lose too much money. And on the 12th of May, the Monday before the first Badab event, the weekend, we got keys, and that's when the real build began. First, Russ and I came down on the first evening, unloaded our terrain and set up the tables. There are loads of ways to do gaming tables for an event venue. I've seen loads at events and clubs I've been to. Obviously, if this was a permanent venue, you'd build some sort of solid 6x4, but we needed something that we could pack down relatively easily at the end of 3 months and ideally store in case we ever wanted to do it again. In the end, I stole an idea from the old Overlords club I used to go to 20 years ago in Essex. Folding plastic tables, the sort of sturdy 6-foot long plastic ones you can get from 30 quid online, topped with 3 panels of 2x4 MDF. Doing it that way means you can stack up all the panels afterwards and it will fit through like a shed door or a loft hatch without too much hassle, a lot less hassle than having 6-foot sheets. I ordered the tables on Amazon. They arrived the Friday before at my work, so that was fine. I spent a Saturday morning at B&Q getting the poor guy to slice up all my MDF into the right size panels. Apologies to anyone else who wanted to get timber cut that morning. There was a bit of a queue behind me by the time I finished that. And then also we would need chairs. And although not everyone sits down at all these events, we would technically need to provide enough for everybody. This looked like it was going to get quite expensive quickly, but I went to Argos and they were selling these discounted metal habitat ones for about £12 each, as long as I bought all the weird colours. So grey and red chairs it was. And Russ and I set to work. We got all that set up on the very first night there. And then we discovered something slightly worrying. 12 tables was a bit of a stretch. We could do it in the space and we came up with various little diagrams of how it could be laid out, but all of it felt quite tight and squeezed in. The big thing about events is that everyone tends to finish their games at different times and then they mill around, they leave their table, watch other games or chat or get something to eat. You can't just fill all the space with tables. That won't work. You need space for an organiser's desk, space to mill around or make announcements, space for people to put bags, that sort of thing. So in the end, we set up 10 tables with loads of space around each of them and loads of wide aisles and a big open area by the door for general milling about. And then we went on Ticket Tailor and made sure that we hadn't sold more than 20 tickets to any of the events and stopped anyone buying more than 20 tickets to the events. I think the first Heresy event was the only one that had sold 20 tickets. Everything else was around 16 or 17 tickets, so we were just in time with that. We could have squeezed in a few more tables and therefore a few more players and thus a few more ticket sales, but I think we wanted a spacious venue. Then we moved on to the next bit, which was setting up and appraising our terrain. So the 4 of us involved in this were me, Gary, Russ, and Nathan, who's like an occasional guest on Tale of 4 Gamers. We all live pretty close to each other. We've all been playing these games for decades. And in that time, we've built a lot of terrain, from official Games Workshop kits to stuff we made 20 years ago out of rubbish. And it's fair to say that it was of quite varying quality. But the last few years, we've mostly been playing at events, game clubs, a few people had kids, and the gaming stuff has generally disappeared into storage. And we'd lost track a bit of not only what we had, but also what condition it was in. We started out making a big list of what we thought were complete-ish sets, at least from the last time we saw them, and hoped that would be enough. But when it actually came to it, it's fair to say that we probably underestimated how much we had. This was the pile of terrain from the load-in day, and this is just me and Gary. Boxes and boxes of stuff. And as we got all this out, the real terrain, we also realized we had more we hadn't thought of, like starter sets for games that come with a bit of terrain that we'd never bothered assembling. It wasn't a case of not having enough terrain, it was more a case of figuring out which of these sets would make up some sort of thematic board and which ones would be suitable for the first event. The first event would be Badab War 40k. We needed 8 tables of 40k terrain specifically meant to represent certain planets, and 3 boarding action boards. And also 40k is quite specific in requiring lots of line of sight blocking terrain nowadays because the terrain rules are a bit basic. So the first week became this frenzy, not of getting terrain made, but of getting boards finished off and updated in ways that worked for the weekend. We all spent a load of time in the evenings, and I spent a bit of time in my work day, just sitting there quickly spraying batches of terrain, finishing off bits we hadn't finished off for 15 years, sticking things on bases, that sort of thing. And in the end, for the first event, we managed the following terrain sets. Larsa 2 is a refinery industrial set of terrain, which was actually the oldest set of terrain I'd built out of a load of like cardboard tubes I got from a theatre show. I chopped them down, put caps on them and a few bands and painted them silver. A lot of this had been in the loft for almost 20 years. And the stuff that was still in use was very battered and a bit plain. And it was mounted on these awful cork tiles that had all started to fall apart. So the week before this, I set it all up at home, went through and repainted it. I added a few more bright colours. I remounted it all on very sturdy 6mm MDF bases. And then I went to town with really bright rust effects just to make it not look so monochrome. This is actually probably the biggest glow up of the week. It looked very basic before, and now it looks pretty intentional with plenty of line of sight blockers and interesting things like the toxic river. This is on a spare concrete mat that Gary had for a different game. The supply world of Sagan is themed as a spaceport. This is another one of mine. I had a couple of Necromunda style buildings I've made from these old plastic robo gear sets. They sort of clip together. A landing pad was in this and a load of hard foam shipping containers, half of which at the time were painted. All this wasn't enough for a 40k board, but I also had this mat spare from a Frontline gaming sale years ago, and I thought the hazard stripes might make it work for like an industrial port area. So I dug out the big bag of Robo Gear bits that I used to make those 2 buildings. I sort of just about had enough for 3 more buildings, mounted them again on new 6mm MDF with a bit of floor texture, added another matching landing pad and a great big crane I got from Troll Trader at the very last minute, so thank you, Troll Trader. And then I painted the whole lot vaguely how I remembered the old stuff being painted, and yeah, this turned out pretty well too. There are some simple extra line of sight blockers here, like these landing pad blast walls, which I made from spare electrical socket backs and some washi tape with hazard warning signs on it. And also, I love these. These are my favourite things of the whole weekend. These little packing crates, which are just 4cm card gift boxes off Amazon with a load of weathering done to them. They work pretty well. Gargathea was the next one. This is a difficult one. The event we were running needed a swamp world. And while we had loads of buildings and industrial stuff, we didn't have much like natural terrain, and we were a bit stumped for how to do this effectively. Nathan had these buildings and bamboo walls and this river from when we were doing a Warcry themed Tale of Four Gamers. So that was a bit of a start, but it wasn't quite enough. But then Gary pointed out he also had a load of the half-finished recent Games Workshop Alien Flora terrain. So he spent the week hurriedly finishing those off with contrast paints and mounting them on these little cut-out jungle areas from Deep Cut Studios. And when you put it all together, it actually works quite well. Okay, this one was already done. This is the spaceship board I built for Zone Mortalis a couple of years back. There's actually a video I've got about doing that. It's made using one of the old Imperial City sets on a 4x4 Frontline gaming mat, but with some black fabric. I covered up enough of the mat to make that a passable boarding actions board. It's not an official layout, but it works well enough, so onwards. Next up was a mining outpost on a deserted world. The desert mat and hills were one of Russ's oldest terrain sets. We used to play like 5th edition 40k on it, and it's made from Games Workshop hills and the Amira plastic moldings vac formed hills. But obviously nowadays this wasn't ideal for 40k. What brought it together was these industrial buildings, which Russ managed to find a few weeks before at Salute for the bargain price of £50 from Beowulf Miniatures. And he managed to get that painted up really fast in a week. So that's the deserted mining planet of Cairo ready for action. Next to that was another deserted mining planet. We wanted a board to be the night moon of Chimera, which is a listening station that gets assaulted in the Badab War. So the mat, craters and hills here are Gary's. They were already painted. The mat's one of those textured plastic Zuzzy mats that's quite delicate, but really nice to play on. The buildings are a mix of old micro art studio stuff made from hard foam and MDF bits, and then various Games Workshop generate-y things that we just had lying around in a box for years. All this red stuff I got done in one day the week before the event, like one evening in the studio. Spray primed, rusted up, bit of weathering, all very, very simple. So that's 6 tables down. We then moved on to some mostly done things. Galen is represented here by the original 1995 Necromunda terrain with some additions. Again, this is all stuff we already had. The bulkheads and MDF bridges were from a Necromunda set I originally made for the old gaming club, but it had got like battered into oblivion years ago, so I'd taken back the bulkheads. I found a second set of cardboard, so I could put that back together. And then the rest of the table is just spare tubes and plumbing supplies with a bit of weathering. I actually quite like that this sort of big, bright tube is the sort of thing that would have been behind this cardboard Necromunda terrain back in 1995. So it feels like a nice old White Dwarf picture. The mat is another frontline gaming mat I've had for ages. Next up is the Imperial Defense Lines of Cerngrad. Like the Necromunda terrain, I'd originally painted up a whole Wall of Martyrs set for my gaming club with the intention of running a Siege of Vrax campaign, but COVID put an end to that idea years before. We'd never picked it back up. The club obviously was now somewhere else and was more focused around things like Infinity and Necromunda. They don't play a lot of 40k. So I sort of got in touch and said, if you're not using it, could I take it back? And they were kind enough to say yes. I added on some bastions that Gary and I already had unbuilt, and some Wall of Martyrs craters that came in one of the more recent sets. And then I got the rest of it painted up to match the old stuff in the week before. It actually still needs a bit of washing to completely match, but it looked good enough for now. And then finally, on the 40k front, this is Gary's old Imperial City set. So the buildings here are all the old Imperial City, which he used to use on a flat grey board. But a while back, he bought the Imperial City Realm of Battle board. This is a full plastic battle board that Games Workshop used to sell. It hasn't been around for ages. And the intention was to break up all of his grey buildings and make them fit the sort of templates on this new board. He painted the board, but then stopped and not done the rest. So his biggest job in the week before was rebuilding all these broken buildings in some way that vaguely looked okay. In order to make it busy enough, we supplemented it with some really old Forge World tank traps and barricades, and then anything else I could find, like this big monument that I actually built for a Golden Demon event a couple of years back at Warhammer World. And then finally, the last 2 boarding actions boards. One of those is the official boarding actions terrain. Gary painted this up for Kill Team a few months ago. And the second is made from these MDF walls that, again, I'd inherited from a friend at the club. Like my spaceship, there's enough here for a way bigger board. The actual mat is 6x4, but with some black fabric, it kind of all works. This actually worked way better than I was expecting. It only required a few minutes of wood gluing the parts back together, and it was up and running. So by the end of the week, we had 11 boards ready for the first event, and that's not even half of what is under all these tables. Russ had an entire cathedral board he'd built that we didn't use because there wasn't a good mission for it in that phase of Badab. Gary has a whole set of Eldar terrain he built ages ago. Nathan bought some Imperial ruined buildings. I have a whole trench board built from more Amira vac form parts that I only didn't use because I couldn't think of a good line of sight blocker in the middle. There's more Necromunda terrain, some MDF buildings that, again, they're not quite enough to make a full board on their own, but yeah, they could be combined with something. Gary has this whole moon outpost built from guttering and the old Daka Daka Maelstrom's Edge scenery sprue. There's just so much here, but that's for later. After a week of finishing and frantically cobbling things together, we were ready. And on May 18th, 16 nerds descended on us for the first event, and mostly it went really well. As well as all the things we've talked about, I also ordered a fridge for refreshments, ordered in some disposable cups, tea, coffee to set up a tea station in the complex's kitchen. I brought in a couple of air conditioning units from other units in the building, just in case it got too hot. There's a lot of big windows in here and skylights and that sort of thing. And the lovely people at the gallery in the unit next door gave us a load of refreshments from their recent private view to fill our fridge with and keep everyone lubricated. So that was really nice of them. Feedback was good. People really complimented the terrain. A lot of people at these events have to play on identical, L-shaped boards. So it was really nice to get ones that were a bit thematic. People like that. And the venue did seem spacious and cool enough. I don't think anyone felt cramped, which was nice. And generally, everyone really liked it. It was a comfortable event. Sorry, there's no secret disaster story there to create a bit of drama. There was a lot to think about, but all in all, it worked, it's working, and the gaming centre is now up and running. So what next? Well, we've got 5 more events booked, 2 Badab, 2 Heresy, and 1 Necromunda. We've just about, as I make this, hit the point where we've sold enough tickets to break even, which is good. Fingers crossed, we've had no big issues crop up. Everything seems fine so far. Although one of the nice things about this first event is all of us were there and it wasn't at capacity. So all of us are able to manage people getting in and out, parking, people knowing where lunch can be got, all that sort of thing is quite easy to do when there's loads of you. When we get further into this, there'll be a few events where only one or 2 of us can be there as like supervisors, or where other groups are doing it, or where it's a full 20 people. So maybe it'll get busy then. Of course, with 5 events happening over 3 months, that means there's a lot of time when it's not going to be used. So I'm planning to use it as an extended workshop for what we're doing. I've broken out the laser cutter from ages ago and all the 3D printers. I've set up a filming area in one of the tables in the corner so we can film some Let's Plays of games. We had loads of new games we wanted to try out, so that'll be nice. And then while we have the space, my bigger goal is to spend these 3 months going through all the spare terrain I have and organising it properly. I'd love to end this period with all the terrain built and arranged into neat boxes which are labelled and do 1 terrain each. Like, that box is a trench table, that box is an outpost, that box is fantasy. That's my intention, but it does kind of rely on how much other stuff I get done in the meantime. I did just buy an entire Imperial Fortress for the Badab event, so that might end up eating up most of the time. But if I can actually do that, it will be lovely to end this period with that having done. And then I think lay off doing events for a while. But it'll be really nice, I think, at the end of this to know that between us, up in the loft or in a shed, we have enough equipment that we could take a space and run an event in it whenever we want. I think that was our goal months ago. And we're already there. We're at that point. Honestly, I think the real challenge here is going to be trying to avoid spending all my summer in the other room instead of being at work. I've got a gaming centre next to my normal office. And already doing this job, trying to separate when I should be doing my real job and when I should be doing YouTube is already quite difficult. So yeah, we'll see how much real work I get done in the next few months. Anyway, that's the story of how we've ended up with this. It's not the most dramatic thing in the world, but it is the reality of trying to run an event space. If you're thinking of doing something similar, hopefully there's some things in there that have jogged your memory that maybe you didn't think of. And maybe you're so inspired you'd like to come down and play, in which case I'll be seeing you at the event space soon. Bit of a weird video this week, but yeah, thanks for watching. And if you'd like to hear more about the world of Warhammer, not just the lore, I guess, then there's another video popping up to the right. Or of course, like and subscribe, go onto the store and buy some merch, buy some tickets for some events, or there's a Patreon and a YouTube membership scheme. See ya!